when we talk about soft despotism, I think it's helpful to apply it to the question of legal recognition for same-sex marriage. Right? At the time I'm recording this, the Supreme Court has not made its decision on this question. So, why is this relevant? Well, I wonder sometimes, is there any real connection between conservatism and opposition to legal recognition of same-sex unions? And at first glance, I would say, well, no, right? It's one of two things, right? One is that it's simply conservatism in the sense of it's the way we've always had things, being careful about government-directed change, etc. Right? So there's not that much, it's sort of these general concerns about how it's being implemented, but there's no real direct connection between conservatism per se and the issue. And of course, the other issue is there tends to be a connection between Christianity and conservatism in American politics, right? And Christianity traditionally does not recognize or approve of same-sex unions. So, but I think some conservatives have made some important links between the general theme of soft despotism and same-sex unions. And here's the idea. The idea is that when you allow legal recognition of same-sex unions, you're actually denying that the family has an inherent structure that the government is bound to respect. You're coming close to saying that marriage is whatever the government decides that it is. Right? Which means that this basic unit of mother, father, child is no longer fundamental. Right? We debate the importance of it, but we don't see it as a natural institution with pre-political rights that the government is obligated to work around. Okay. So in order to look at this, let me show you an example from a television show. This is from the television show Friends. Now, this scene involves a character named Ross, whose ex-wife decided that she was a lesbian, and is involved in a long-term relationship with another woman. And discovers that shortly before their divorce, she had become pregnant. Right? So Ross has a biological child. Right? Now, let's look at some of the conversation they have at the obstetrician's office. When I looked at this scene, right, it gave me some pause for thought, because I said, okay, so what's going on in this scene? Well, it's hard to tell whether or not the writers, producers, etc. Are on one side or the other here. Right? Ross tends to be a sort of pathetic character, right? So it's almost showing him as this sort of insecure person, right, who's being somewhat rude. Right? Now, it's also kind of seen his ex-wife as a little selfish. But what does it mean that we're discussing this issue? Okay, so it's his biological child. Basically, he married someone. As he said, they took a vow. Right? They made a permanent vow to each other. She decided that for various reasons, right, that would not be a fulfilling life for her. So she unilaterally broke off their relationship despite her vows. Discovered that she had a baby, which is his biological child. And is now saying that she has the right to give the child a hyphenated name with her name and the name of someone who has no biological relation to the child, and expects him to meekly accept this. At which point I say, so wait a minute, what's going on here? So does this mean fathers basically have no rights but what the mother chooses to give? And as some people have come along and said, if that were true, it's not clear how we can require paternity payments. Okay? If the father has no inherent rights to a connection to the child, then it would seem that the father has no inherent obligations either. More generally, right, this brings up the question, so is this saying that we don't see this connection as father, mother, and child, right, as inherently important? Right? That we see it as having whatever rights and responsibilities society decides to assign to it? I think you can see why that would be seen as very disturbing to people. Right? And that's why some people say when we recognize same-sex union, we're essentially saying it's really an extension of the idea of the Leviathan state. Whatever we decide as a whole society is best as relationships between people and the limits of their rights and duties is the way it will be. Right? And there's nothing else, there's no inherent rights to families, towns, etc., that the state's bound to respect. In other contexts, I've called this the commodification of children. Right? When I teach this issue in applied ethics, I say it's like children are in some ways becoming a commodity. Right? And we see that especially with things like surrogate parenting. Right? So that's a reason to think that perhaps there is some connection between conservatism per se and opposition to same-sex marriage. Right? That to recognize same-sex unions as the same as a married couple, right? And especially in cases where that's extended to treating a family, right? Say surrogate mother, partner, and child, as the same as mother, father, and child, right? Is really giving a certain sort of power and authority to the state that we ought not to give it.